This is the truck that we normally use to train students so they can get their CDL license in the state of New Mexico. This is how you perform a pre-trip inspection according to the New Mexico CDL manual. As I get ready to perform a pre-trip on this truck, I want to make sure that my wheels are blocked and the key is in my possession, it's in my pocket. Okay, I'm going to start with the front end. I'm going to look at the top of the truck, make sure that everything's intact, nothing's broke. The clearance lights on top of the cab are all in place, they're clean and they're amber in color. The windshield, I can't see any problem with the windshield from here. I'm also going to inspect it from the end cap. I'm going to look at the grill, make sure that there's nothing lodged on the grill that's going to cause me heating problems going down the road. I'm going to check the lights, the headlights, make sure that the high beam and the low beam are functional and they're clean and there's no brakes on them. I'm also going to check the left turn signal and the right turn signal. Make sure they're amber in color, they're not broke and they're clean. And I'm also going to make sure that the four-way flashers are working. Now I'm going to go down to my bumper, make sure my bumper is properly mounted and secure. I'm going to check my license, make sure it's current and properly mounted. I'm going to look underneath the vehicle, make sure there's no oil leaks or water leaks indicating I could have a problem. I'm also going to check the truck, make sure it's level. If it's not level, it could indicate a broken spring, a broken shock, low tire, or even a shifted load. On the passenger side of the vehicle, I'm going to give it a good overview. I'm going to check for leaks. I'm going to check any abrasions, any problems with hoses, make sure everything is properly mounted. I don't see any problem with any of the hoses or wiring. Everything looks good. I'm going to check the coolant level in the coolant tank. And right here is where I would add coolant if I was going to add some, but I would never take the cap off when it's been hot. I'm going to check my windshield washer level. And right here is where I would add some if I needed to. I'm going to check my water pump. The water pump is right here. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secure. There's no leaks on it. And it's belt driven. I would check the belt, make sure it's not frayed, cut, and no damage to it. And I shouldn't have no more than 3/4 of an inch of play on the fan belt. I'm also going to check the fan, make sure that all the fan blades are in place, they're not rubbing against the shroud. And everything looks good. I'm going to check the radiator, my mounts, radiator mounts, make sure everything is okay with the radiator. I'm going to check my turbos. We have double turbos. I'm going to check them, make sure there's no leaks, no exhaust leaks, no oil leaks on them. And out of the turbo is the exhaust pipe. I'm going to check it as it goes out the back. I'm going to look at the exhaust system under here. Make sure it's not rubbing on any plumbing or any wires, and make sure there's no black spot on the clamps indicating an exhaust leak. Okay, on the driver's side, I'm going to give it a good overview. I'm going to check for oil leaks. I'm going to check for any coolant leaks. I'm also going to check all the plumbing, all the hoses, everything, make sure they're properly mounted. I don't see anything rubbing where it's going to cause any problems. I'm going to check the oil level with the dipstick. And if I was to need to add any oil, I would add it right here in the filler tube. I'm going to check my alternator. Alternator is properly mounted and secured. The wires are properly insulated, and it's belt-driven alternator. And I would also make sure that the belt is good, not frayed, not cut, and it has no more than 3/4 of an inch of play on it. I'm going to check the power steering pump located right behind the frame. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure, and all the hoses are properly mounted and they're not leaking, no bolts gone on it. I'm going to check the air compressor, also mounted behind the frame. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure and all the hoses are intact and they're not leaking, no problems there. The power steering fluid, I would make sure that it's to the proper level. And if I needed to add any to it, I would add some right here. The hoses, power steering hoses, are all good the hoses going to the pump are not leaking anywhere. I'm going to check the power steering or the steering shaft. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not bent, not cracked, not damaged. Make sure that the U-joint is properly lubricated. I'm going to check the gearbox. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secure. All the bolts are there, they're all tight, and I don't see any visual leaks on the box. I'm going to check the pitman arm. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure. Make sure the castle nut is in place. Make sure that the cutter pin is in place and they're tight. I'm going to check the drag link. Make sure it's not bent, not damaged, no aftermarket welds on it. I'm going to check the upper and lower steering knuckle. Make sure that they're good, not broke, no aftermarket welds on it. I'm going to check the castle nut here also. Make sure it's tight and the cutter pin is in place. The next component is going to be the tie rod. Going to the other side. Make sure that it's properly mounted, secured, not damaged, not cracked, not bent. Now I'm going to go to my suspension. I'm going to check my front spring hanger. Make sure all the bolts are in place. It's bolted to the frame properly and no aftermarket welds, no cracks. I'm going to check the back spring hanger. Make sure it's not damaged, properly mounted, secure, and all the bolts are there. I'm going to check my springs, make sure that they're all good, no cracks, they're not twisted, make sure they're good. I'm going to check the U-bolts, make sure they're tight. Make sure there's no shiny spots on them indicating that they're working loose. I'm also going to check the shock absorber, make sure the upper and the lower grommets are good, in good shape, and it's not leaking any oil from the shock. Now I'm going to do my brakes, my air line coming to my brake chamber. Make sure it's not frayed, not cut, no damage, no audible air leads. I'm also going to check the ABS line, make sure that it's properly mounted and it's not damaged. I'm going to check my brake chamber, make sure it's properly mounted and secure, the bolts are tight. Make sure the clamp is tight and it's not leaking air. I'm also going to check my push rod and my slack adjuster. Make sure they're properly mounted and secure. Make sure my pins are in place and the cutter pins are in place also. And if I was to check the adjustment on the brake when they're released, I shouldn't be able to pull this no more than 1 inch of play manually. Okay, I'm going to check the brake shoes. Make sure they're properly mounted and secure. Make sure there's no less than 1/4 inch of lining left on them. I'm also going to check the drum, make sure that it's properly mounted and secure. No discoloration, no heat tracing, no cracks, no aftermarket welds. And make sure there's no oil or grease on the drum indicating the inner wheel seal is leaking. I'm going to check the rim, make sure that the inside rim, the bead is all good, not cracked, not damaged. The outside bead on the wheel also make sure that it's not damaged and there's no cracks on the rim or no aftermarket welds. I'm also going to check the sidewalls of the tires. Make sure there's no abrasions, cuts, no separations. I'm going to check the top of the tire, make sure that it's wearing even. And I should have at least 4/32 seconds of rubber left on the front tires, and I am not allowed to have recaps. I'm going to check the valve stem, make sure that it's not rubbing against the rim or the brake drum, and it's got a steel cap. And right there is where I would check the inflation of the tire with a tire gauge. Now I'm going to check the lug nuts, make sure that they're all accounted for, they're all tight. Make sure there's no black rings around aluminum wheels or rusty rings around steel wheels that could indicate they're working loose. Now I'm going to check the hub oiler, make sure that all the bolts are there, they're all tight, no sign of leaks there. And right here is where I would add lubricant to it if I needed to. On the side of the truck, I would check, make sure that this light is properly mounted and secure. Make sure it's amber in color, and that would be a turn signal and four-way flasher. I'm also going to check the door, make sure it opens and closes properly. And I'm going to check the mirror, make sure it's properly mounted and secure and adjusted to the driver. Okay, on the inside of the door, I would make sure that it locks and unlocks. I would make sure that the window rolls up and down properly. I'm going to check the weather strip and make sure that it's properly mounted secure, not damaged in any way. I'm also going to check the seat, make sure that it's properly mounted and secure, not going to cause any problems going down the road. Okay, now I'm going to check the step, make sure that it's properly mounted secure, nothing on there that's going to cause me to trip, and it's properly, all the bolts are tight. Both steps are in good shape. I'm going to check the DEF tank, make sure that the cap is on there properly mounted and it's got a rubber seal in there to keep it from leaking. I'm also going to look underneath, make sure there's no DEF leaking on the ground. I'm going to check the side of the cab. Everything looks in good order. I don't see any cracks, any damage to it anywhere. The window looks to be properly mounted and secure. I'm going to check the fuel tank. I'm going to check the straps, make sure that they're in place, and it's got the rubber insulation on the straps, so we won't have any metal to metal rubbing. I'm going to check, make sure that the cap has got a rubber seal in there and it's not leaking. I'm also going to look underneath, make sure that there's no apparent leaks on the fuel tank. Okay, I'm going to check the fire extinguisher, make sure it's properly mounted, properly rated, and properly charged. I also have the triangles mounted right here. Make sure that I have at least 3 triangles that are operational if in case I need them. Okay, the back of the frame, I'm going to check. If I had grab handles, I would make sure that they're properly mounted secure. I'm going to check the back, make sure any lights that are mounted back here are properly mounted secure, not broke, and they're the proper color. I'm going to check the air hoses coming out of the cab. Make sure that they're all good, no leaks. I'm going to check the light cord, make sure that it's properly mounted to the cab and the safety latch is in place. I'm also going to look at the frame, make sure that I don't have any problems with the frame. I can see all the way back and all the way back front. Make sure all the bolts are in place and all the cross members are in place and they're not broke. I would check the batteries, make sure that they're properly mounted and secure, make sure the cables are not corroded, make sure that they're maintenance batteries. I would check the liquid on them. If they were non-maintenance, I wouldn't worry about the liquid on them. And I'm going to check the drive line, make sure that it's properly mounted and secure, not twisted, not broke. I would also check the U-joints, make sure that they're properly lubricated. Now I'm going to go to my suspension. I'm going to check my spring hangers, make sure all the bolts are in place, they're all tight, you don't have no aftermarket welds or no cracks. I'm going to check my torque arm, make sure that it's properly mounted and secure. Make sure my spring leads are in good shape, not cracked, no hairline cracks on them. Now I'm going to check my U-bolts, make sure that they're properly mounted and secure. They're not loose, not shiny, indicating they're working loose. I'm going to check the airbag, make sure it's not weather cracked, no visible leaks, no problems there. I'm going to check the upper and the lower mounting brackets, make sure they're not rusted. All the bolts are there, they're all tight, no problems there. I'm going to check the shock absorber, make sure it's properly mounted secure. The upper and the lower grommets are in place and they're not weather cracked. And also I would check, make sure there's no oil leaks on the shock absorber, indicating it need a replacing. Okay, I'm going to check the rims, make sure that the inside of the rim is good, the bead on it. The outside of the inside rim, make sure that the bead on it is good. I'm going to check the sidewalls of the tires, the inside tire, make sure there's no bulges, separations, no cracks, no visible air leaks. I'm going to check the sidewalls of the tires, make sure there's no abrasions, cuts, or separations, no leaks on the sidewalls of the tires. I'm going to check the top of the tire, make sure that it's wearing even, it's properly inflated, and I should have no less than 2/32 of rubber on this tire. Okay, on the outer tire, I'm going to check the rim, the inside of the rim. I'm also going to check for spacers. If I had a spacer between the rims, I would check, make sure it's not rusted, not damaged in any way. Since I don't have a spacer, I would make sure that my wheels are butted up against each other tight. Then we'll check the inside bead of the rim. Make sure it's not damaged, not cracked in any way, no leaks. Check the inside sidewall of the tire. Make sure there's no abrasions, cuts, separations. Same as the outside of the tire. Make sure there's no separations, no abrasions, no cuts on the tire. The top of the tire, make sure that it's wearing even. Make sure I have at least 2/32 of rubber left on my thread, and I am allowed to have recaps, but these are not recaps. I won't worry about that. Now I'm going to check the outside rim, the bead all the way around, make sure it's good. I'm going to check the lug nuts, make sure that they're properly mounted and secure. And this being aluminum rims, I would check for black marks. If I had steel rims, I would check for rusty marks, indicating they could be working loose. Now I'm going to check my valve stem. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure. Make sure it's not rubbing against the rim or the brake drums. And right there's where I would check the inflation of the tire with the tire gauge. Now behind this chrome cover, I have the axle. I would make sure that all the bolts are in place, they're all tight, and there's no leaks, and no leaks on the gasket on the axle. Make sure it's all properly in good shape. Everything I inspected on this front axle, I would inspect on the back axle, identical. Make sure it's the same. Okay, I'm going to check the mud flap. Make sure it's properly mounted. Make sure the mount is good. It's not damaged in any way. Make sure the mud flap is the perfect length. I'm going to check the lights on the back of the tractor. Make sure they're red in color, they're clean, they're properly mounted. I'm going to check the left turn signal, the right turn signal, four-way flashers, tail lights, and brake lights. Okay, I'm going to check the K-pin. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure, it's not damaged, not overly worn. Make sure that the jaws are properly latched around the kingpin. Okay, I'm going to check the apron. Make sure it's not overly worn, not bent. I'm going to check the skid plate. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secure and not damaged. The pin for the skid plate, make sure it's right in the right position and the pins are in place. I'm going to check the slider. Make sure the slider is properly mounted and secure and it's in the latch position. I'm going to check the lever for the jaws. Make sure it's in the lock position. And if I had a safety, I would make sure that it was on the safe mode. I'm going to check the platform. Make sure the platform is properly mounted. Make sure all the mounting bolts are in place. All the bolts going into the frame are properly mounted and properly and tight. And make sure that the air line coming to the slider dogs is not leaking and it's properly mounted. Okay, I'm going to check the air lines coming to the trailer. Make sure they're all properly suspended. They're not rubbing against the frame or the catwalk. I'm going to check make sure that the right hand rubbers are properly mounted. They're in good shape and they're not leaking. And there's no liquid in the air lines. I'm going to check the power cord. Make sure that it's properly mounted and no problem there. And the safety latch is in place. I'm going to check the bulkhead. Make sure that it's not damaged in any way. All the rivets look good and I don't see any damage there. If I had a catwalk, I would check the catwalk, make sure it's properly mounted and secure, not damaged in any way. I would check the steps if I had steps, make sure they're properly mounted and they're not going to cause me to trip going up to the catwalk. Okay, I'm going to check the side of the trailer, make sure the siding is good, all the rivets are good. I'm going to check the lights, clearance lights up on top, make sure they're amber in color and they're working, they're clean. I'm going to check the DOT reflective tape, make sure that it's mounted properly and everything looks good there. I'm going to check the landing gear, make sure all the brackets are properly mounted. I'm going to check, make sure that the crank is safely stowed and make sure that it works on up and down position and also on fast and slow position. I'm also going to check the foot of the landing gear, make sure that it's properly mounted and it's not going to fall going down the road. I'm also going to check, make sure that I have enough clearance between the tractor and the landing gear for when I make turns. I'm also going to look at the cross members under the trailer, make sure that they're all properly mounted, they're not bent, not broken in any way. I'm going to check the suspension. I'm going to check the handle for the sliders, for the pins for the sliders. Make sure it's in the lock position. I'm going to check the pins. Make sure they're in the lock position also. I'm going to check my spring hanger, make sure it's properly mounted secure, no aftermarket welds, everything looks good. I'm going to check my torque adjustment, make sure it's properly mounted secure and it's properly adjusted. I'm going to check my walking beams, make sure that they're properly mounted secure. I'm going to check the airbag, make sure that they're not weather cracked. Make sure the upper and lower bracket are good, they're not damaged and properly mounted and secure. I'm going to check the shock absorber, make sure that the grommets on the bottom and top are good. Make sure that it's not leaking oil. Make sure it's all good. Now I'm going to do the brakes. I'm going to check the air lines coming to the brake pods. Make sure there's no abrasions, no cuts, no separations, no leaks. I'm going to check my brake chamber, make sure that it's properly mounted and secure. Make sure my clamps are tight. Right behind the brake chamber is a slack adjuster. Make sure it's properly mounted and secure. The push rod. Make sure that it's not bent, not overly worn. And if I was to check my slack adjuster for adjustment when my brakes are released, I should be able to pull it no more than 1 inch. Now I'm going to check my brake shoes, make sure they're properly mounted and secure. Make sure I have at least 1/4 inch of lining left on them. I'm going to check my brake drum, make sure it's properly mounted, no discoloration, no heat cracks, no oil or grease showing on the brake drum indicating no inside wheel seals leaking. I'm also going to check the inner rim, make sure the bead is all good, make sure there's no dings on it that's going to cause any leaks on the tire. I'm going to check the sidewall of the tire, make sure that there's no separations, no cracks, no abrasions. The outside of the tire, make sure it's properly secure and it's got at least 2 seconds of rubber left on them. And I am allowed recaps on these tires, and these are recaps. I would check, make sure they're not coming loose. I'm going to check between the tires, make sure that my sidewalls are good on both tires. No abrasions, cuts, no separations. My rim, I would check for a spacer if I had one. Since I don't have a spacer, I would check, make sure that my rims are butted up against each other tight. The outside tire, same way. I'm going to check the sidewall, make sure there's no cracks, no separations. The top of the tire, make sure I have at least 2 seconds of rubber left on it. I'm going to check the rim, make sure there's no damage to the bead, make sure it's all sealed good. No cracks, no aftermarket welds, everything looks good with the rim. I'm going to check the valve stem, make sure it's properly mounted secure, not rubbing against the rim or the brake drum. And I'm going to make sure it's got a steel cap, and right there's where I would check the inflation of the tires with the tire gauge. And everything I did to this axle, I would do to this axle. I'm going to check the mud flap, make sure it's properly mounted, the bracket is in good shape, make sure it's to the proper length. I'm going to check the ABS light, make sure it works, properly mounted, secure, and it's amber in color. I'm going to check the clearance light, make sure it's red in color and properly mounted and secure. Again, I'm going to check the DOT tape, make sure that it's properly mounted. Okay, I'm going to check the back of the trailer. I'm going to check the door, make sure it's all good, properly mounted, secure. If I had hinges, I would check the hinges. I do not have hinges, but it's properly mounted. I would check the lights up on top, make sure that the clearance lights are properly mounted, clean, and they're red in color. I'm going to check the lights back here in the back, make sure they're red in color, properly mounted, secure. I'm going to check the left turn signal, the right turn signal, the four-way flashers. I'm going to check the tail lights, and the stoplights, make sure they all work and they're all red in color. I also have a license plate right here. I'm going to check, make sure it's properly mounted, and it's got a light on the license plate. Also going to check the DOT bumper, make sure it's properly mounted, secured, no breaks on the weld, and make sure the DOT reflective tape is in place. Make sure the latch for the door is properly mounted and properly operational. And everything I did on the left side of the truck, I would do on this side, unless I had some other equipment, which I don't. I'm in good shape. First thing I'm going to do when I get in the cab, I'm going to check the safety equipment. I've got the fire extinguisher and the triangles in the sleeper, in the box of the sleeper. I have my extra fuses right here for in case I need them. I'm going to check my seat belt. Make sure it's not frayed, not cut, not damaged. Make sure it latches and unlatches properly. And at this point, I'm going to leave it latched. Now I'm going to check my steering wheel. Make sure I have no more than 2 inches of play on a 20-inch wheel or 10%. I'm going to check my clutch. Make sure I have proper free play. Make sure it goes all the way to the floor. I'm going to check my gear shift. Make sure that it goes in the gears like it's supposed to. I'm going to check my horn, make sure it works, make sure my horn, both horns work. I'm going to check my windows. I'm going to check my side windows, my windshield, make sure they're not cracked, no aftermarket stickers on it. Make sure my windshield has no cracks, no chips bigger than the size of a quarter, or no cracks longer than 2 inches. I'm going to check my mirrors, make sure that they're properly clean and they're properly mounted and they're adjusted to me as a driver. Now I'm going to do a safety start. I'm going to step on my clutch, make sure it releases, make sure my gear shift is in neutral, and okay, immediately after it started, I'm going to check my oil pressure gauge, make sure it comes to the proper operating range. I'm going to check my water temperature gauge, make sure that it's going to be coming up as my engine warms up and it works. I'm going to check my amp gauge, voltmeter, make sure that it's working and it's within between 12 and 14 volts. I'm going to also check my air gauges, make sure that they're properly working and they're coming up as the air comes up. I'm going to check my heater and defroster, make sure my defroster works and my heater does down on the bottom. I'm going to check my wipers, make sure my wipers work and my windshield washers, and they work good. As my air builds up, I'm going to let it build up to governor cutoff, which is approximately 120 psi. And then I'm going to start my 3-point air brake test. My brakes are in park, make sure that my wheels are locked. Okay, my air has reached governor cutoff. I'm going to turn my engine off and I'm going to turn my key back on. I'm going to release my tractor and trailer brakes. My wheels are chocked, so I don't have to worry about them rolling. Okay, number one, I'm going to do a pressure test. I'm going to apply 90 pounds of air to my system, and I'm going to hold it for a minute and make sure that I don't lose no more than 3 psi on a single unit or 4 psi on a combination. This is a combination, so I'm going to check on the 4 psi. And it's holding. After a minute, I'll release it, and I'm okay with that test. The next test is going to be my low air warning. I'm going to fan my brakes When my air gets down to above 55, my low air warning should come on. And it came on at 60. Now I'm going to fan my brakes, and between 20 and 40 psi, my parking brakes, both my tractor and my trailer, should apply. And they did. Okay, now I'm going to restart, do a safety start again, step on my clutch, make sure, start it back up. Now I'm going to build my air back up, and while I'm building air, I'm going to get out and take my wheel chocks off. Okay, I'm going to do the tug test on the parking brake. I'm going to release my trailer brakes, and I'm going to tug against my tractor brakes. I'm going to put it in first gear and let out my clutch easy. And it's holding. Now I'm going to release my trailer brakes and apply my tractor brakes, and I'm going to tug on it again, make sure that, and it's holding. Now I'm going to release both tractor and trailer brakes. I'm going to drive forward to about 5 miles an hour, and I'm going to check my service brakes. I'm going to apply my brakes and make sure it doesn't pull to one side or the other. And it didn't pull to one side or the other, so the adjustment on the service brakes is good.